So I used to teach junior high, and this one day I came into class, and this one was just eighth graders. And I wasn't having it that day. Like I didn't want to do history. That's what I was normally teaching back then. And so I just looked at the kids there and I was like, hey, do you guys just want to do a read aloud? Down the hall early in the day, I would teach fourth and fifth graders, and we'd sit around and just do, I'd read a book and we'd talk about it. And I just, with the eighth graders, like, why are we doing this with older kids, 12, 13, 14 and beyond? Like, why all of a sudden, well, we're going to be very proper now. We would never sit on the ground and do a read aloud. But we're doing that with the younger kids. So I just asked them and they're like, yeah, let's do that. And they were stoked. And this must have been maybe like 12 kids or so. I don't remember the exact number. But so we sat there. I pulled out a book I was actually reading with the younger kids. I read it and we just chatted about it. And what was cool is, like, with younger kids, you can only do so much, right? Like they're not with it. You get to age 13, 14, man, I consider you like a young adult. You're basically up there. We can have real conversations. So what I want to do today and in the weeks to come is to read a book with you all out there. Now, it's not the same. It can't be like, immediately going back and forth, but YouTube, since this is not a kiddie video, this is like young adult or a normal video. You can make comments. You can write me. I'll give you an email address at the end of this video and we can go back and forth. And the book I chose is called Shane by Jack Schaefer. See that cowboy on the horse there. Man, what a book. Has a huge impact on me. And this guy, Shane, I can't wait for you to meet him. Let me see the notes I got. I got a couple notes before we hop in. Oh, one is just looking around. I'm looking at the screen. I just had a child, first child, my boy named Ragnar, just last month, actually. So that's why there's some bright colors here. And there's like maybe a floor bed over there. And there's a mirror behind me. It's all for him, man. All for that guy. He actually kind of motivated me to get this out because, if God forbid something happens to me, I'd love for him to have this video of me reading this, one of my favorite books, and one of my favorite people in the whole world. I know he's a character in a book, but you'll meet him. Maybe you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about. So, and in particular, I'll just say right now, you just turn on social media, turn on the news, and just people you don't really look up to these people. They're just kind of, I don't know, it's just either they're boring or they're talking BS. Like when you see Shane, I think he's going to stand out. I mean, he stands out to me, and he's somebody I can look up to and aspire to. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of sad when you look out there and there's only people that are kind of average or even below average. People like, I don't want to be like that person. I think we need people to look up to and want to be like, or even surpass in our own way. So, anyways, that's kind of a quick intro to this cowboy Western book that in some ways is super modern, though. So I think you'll appreciate. Let's hop in. Shane by Jack Schaefer. If I hold up on the screen, so there's a picture there, sometimes, I'm taking notes on words and so forth, so don't worry about that writing. But here we go. He rode into our valley in the summer of '89. I was a kid then, barely topping the backboard of Father's old chuck wagon. I was on the upper rail of our small corral, soaking in the late afternoon sun, when I saw him far down the road where it swung into the valley from the open plain beyond. In that clear Wyoming air, I could see him plainly, though he was still several miles away. There seemed nothing remarkable about him, just another stray horseman riding up the road toward the cluster of frame buildings that was our town. Then I saw a pair of cowhands lopping past him, stop and stare after him with a curious intentness. So this is not today, right? You rarely see some dude cruising up on a horse, into your town. So this is like late 1800s in America. He came steadily on, straight through the town without slackening pace, until he reached the fork a half mile below our place. One branch turned left across the river ford and on to Luke Fletcher's big spread. The other bore ahead along the right bank where we homesteaders had pegged our claims in a row up the valley. He hesitated briefly, studying the choice, and moved again steadily on our side. So a homesteader, if you don't know, is like in these days, the government was giving out some free land if you went out there and moved and started working the land and so forth, because they wanted people to kind of spread out in America to move west. As he came near, what impressed me first was his clothes. He wore dark trousers of some serge material tucked into tall boots and held at the waist by a wide belt, both of a soft black leather tooled in intricate design. A coat of the same dark material as the trousers was neatly folded and strapped to his saddle roll. His shirt was fine spun linen, rich brown in color. The handkerchief knotted loosely around his throat was black silk. His hat was not the familiar Stetson, not the familiar gray or muddy tan. It was a plain black, soft in texture, unlike any hat I had ever seen, with a creased crown and a wide curling brim swept down in front to shield the face. The guy's a real cowboy. All trace of newness was long since gone from these things. The dust of distance was beaten into them. They were worn and stained, and several neat patches showed on the shirt. Yet a kind of magnificence remained, and with it a hint of men and manners alien to my limited boy's experience. Then I forgot the clothes and the impact of the man himself. He was not much above medium height, almost slight in build. He would have looked frail alongside father's square, solid bulk. But even I could read the endurance in the lines of that dark figure and the quiet power in its effortless, unthinking adjustment to every movement of the tired horse. He was clean shaven and his face was lean and hard and burned from high forehead to firm, tapering chin. His eyes seemed hooded in the shadow of their hat's brim. He came closer, and I could see that this was because the brows were drawn in a frown of fixed and habitual alertness. Beneath them, the eyes were endlessly searching from side to side and forward, checking off every item in view, missing nothing. As I noticed this, a sudden chill, I could not have told why, struck through me there in the warm and open sun. He rode easily, relaxed in the saddle, leaning his weight lazily in the stirrups. Yet even in this easiness was a suggestion of tension. It was the easiness of a coiled spring, of a trap set. He drew rein not 20 feet from me. His glance hit me, dismissed me, flicked over our place. This was not much if you were thinking in terms of size and scope. But what there was good. You could trust father for that. The corral, big enough for about 30 head if you crowded them in, was railed right to true sunk posts. So this is where you might keep, cattle. The pasture behind, taking in nearly half of our claim, was fenced tight. The barn was small, but it was solid. And we were raising a loft at one end of the alfalfa growing green in the north 40. So kind of, when I think they say 40, I'm thinking acres, like 40 acres. And an acre is like a size of a football field. It's big. Interesting enough, you can see in the background here, there's green. So I'm out in South Florida and we've been living in apartments for most of our lives, but we're on an acre now. It's big. It's big. Anyhow, they've got 40 acres, 40 football fields. That's the size of their land. We had a fair-sized field and potatoes that year, and father was trying a new corn he had sent all the way to Washington for, and they were showing properly in weedless rows. So whoever this boy is talking about his father. He handles stuff, like he takes care of this home and this homestead, this land. Behind the house, mother's kitchen garden was a brave sight. The house itself was 3 rooms, two really, the big kitchen where we spent most of our time indoors, and the bedroom beside it. My little lean-to room was added back of the kitchen. Father was planning, when he could get around to it, to build mother the parlor she wanted. So mom has this meeting room and so forth. We had wooden floors and a nice porch across the front. The house was painted too, white with green trim, rare thing in all that region, to remind her, mother said when she made father do it, of her native New England. Even rarer, the roof was shingled. I knew what that meant. I had helped father split those shingles. Few places so spruce, or like neat, and well worked could be found so deep in the territory those days. So I just want to stop and say for a moment, where are you? Like, if you look around wherever you are listening, did your dad build that place? Like, literally with his hands, did he build up the walls where you're at? I mean, this is if you're at home. If you're at the mall, obviously your dad didn't build none of that. But um, most likely, if you're watching this, your dad did not build that. Your mom did not build that. Nobody in your family built that. Somebody else built that house. And like, same here. Like, I got a house, solid house. I didn't build this. I mean, I'm doing some work around here. These days, people built their own homes, at least out here, and did everything with it. Like that kitchen he's saying his mom had or whatever, the dad built that kitchen. Anyways, that's just some context for, this book at the time. All right. The stranger took it all in, sitting there easily in the saddle. I saw his eyes slow on the flowers mother had planted by the porch steps, then come to rest on our shiny new pump and the trough beside it. They shifted back to me, and again, without knowing why, I felt that sudden chill. But his voice was gentle, and he spoke like a man schooled in patience. I'd appreciate a chance at the pump for myself and the horse. I was trying to frame a reply and choking on it when I realized that he was not speaking to me, but past me. Father had come up behind me and was leaning against the gate to the corral. Use all the water you want, stranger. Father and I watched him dismount in a single flowing tilt of his body and lead the horse over to the trough. He pumped it almost full and let the horse sink its nose in the cool water before he picked up the dipper for himself. He took off his hat and slapped the dust out of it and hung it on a corner of the trough. With his hands, he brushed the dust from his clothes. With a piece of rag pulled from his saddle roll, he carefully wiped his boots. He untied the handkerchief from around his neck and rolled his sleeves and dipped his arms in the trough, rubbing thoroughly and splashing water over his face. He shook his hands dry and used the handkerchief to remove the last drops from his face. Taking a comb from his shirt pocket, he smoothed back his long, dark hair. All his movements were deft, like skillful and sure. And with a quick precision, he flipped down his sleeves, re-knotted the handkerchief, and picked up his hat. Then, holding it in his hand, he spun about and strode directly toward the house. He bent low and snapped the stem of one of Mother's petunias and tucked this into the hat band. So this guy's like, whoop. In another moment, the hat was on his head, brim swept down in swift, unconscious gesture, and he was swinging gracefully into the saddle and starting toward the road. I was fascinated. None of the men I knew were proud like that about their appearance. In that short time, the kind of magnificence I had noticed had emerged into plainer view. It was in the very air of him. Everything about him showed the effects of long use and hard use, but showed too the strength of quality and competence. There was no chill on me now. Already I was imagining myself in hat and belt and boots like those. He stopped the horse and looked down at us. He was refreshed, and I would have sworn the tiny wrinkles around his eyes were what with him would be a smile. His eyes were not restless when he looked at you like this. They were still and steady, and you knew the man's whole attention was concentrated on you, even in the casual glance. Thank you, he said in his gentle voice, and was turning into the road back to us before Father spoke in his slow, deliberate way. Don't be in such a hurry, stranger. I had to hold tight to the rail. I would have fallen backwards into the corral. At the first sound of Father's voice, the man and the horse, like a single being, had wheeled to face us, the man's eyes boring at Father, bright and deep in the shadow of the hat's brim. So he's kind of like, I was shivering, struck through once more. Something intangible and cold and terrifying was there in the air between us. I stared in wonder as father and the stranger looked at each other a long moment, measuring each other in an unspoken fraternity or kind of like a brotherhood of adult knowledge beyond my reach. Then the warm sunlight was flooding over us, for father was smiling and he was speaking with the drawling of slow emphasis that meant he had made up his mind. I said, don't be in such a hurry, stranger. Food will be on the table soon, and you could bed down here tonight. The stranger nodded quietly as if he too had made up his mind. That's mighty thoughtful of you, he said, and swung down and came toward us, leading his horse. Father slipped into step beside him, and we all headed for the barn. My name's Starrett, said father. Joe Starrett. This here, waving at me, is Robert McPherson Starrett. Too much name for a boy. I make it Bob. The stranger nodded again. Call me Shane, he said. Then to me, Bob it is. You were watching me for quite a spell coming up the road. It was not a question. It was a simple statement. Yes, I stammered. Yes, I was. Right, he said. I like that. A man who watches what's going on around him will make his mark. A man who watches. For all his dark appearance and lean, hard look, this Shane knew what would please a boy. The glow of it held me as he took care of his horse, and I fussed around, hanging up his saddle, forking over some hay, getting in his way and my own in my eagerness. He let me slip the bridle off, and the horse, bigger and more powerful than I had thought now that I was close beside it, put its head down patiently for me and stood quietly while I helped him curry away the caked dust. Only once did he stop me. That was when I reached for his saddle roll to put it to one side. In the instant my fingers touched it, he was taking it from me, and he put it on a shelf with a finality that indicated no interference. So he's got something on that saddle that Bob had touched, and Shane reacted very quickly and said, put it aside, like, ain't nobody touching this, that kind of thing. When the three of us went up to the house, Mother was waiting and 4 places were set at the table. I saw you through the window, she said, and came to shake our visitor's hand. She was a slender, lively woman with a fair complexion even our weather never seemed to affect, and a mass of light brown hair she wore piled high to bring her, she used to say, closer to Father's size. Marion, Father said, I'd like you to meet Mr. Shane. Good evening, ma'am, said our visitor. He took her hand and bowed over it. Mother stepped back and, to my surprise, dropped in a dainty curtsy. She's like, I had never seen her do that before. She was an unpredictable woman. Father and I would have painted the house 3 times over and in rainbow colors to please her. The guys out there, is there a girl that you would paint a house 3 times over and in rainbow colors just to make her happy? Like, you would do anything for a girl out there. And maybe for the ladies out there, is there a guy who you would love him to do anything for you just to make you happy? It's interesting. I know, man, when I was a teenager, yeah, my whole focus was on girls. It's crazy. I remember reading a book. This is kind of a side note, but when I was teaching, one of the big books I was in, this was a while ago, was Twilight. And I remember this one scene where the main character, I think his name was Edward and Bella. I think those were the 2. Hopefully I'm getting, maybe Edwin. Anyways, so Bella's in the class, it's the science classroom, and she's just staring off at him. And the teacher's going on and on just with this lecture, and it just reminded me that those days, it didn't matter how cool a lecture was or how great, like there were those moments where I was so focused on, a girl I liked or something. Anyway, just a side note. Father and I would have painted the house 3 times over and in rainbow colors to please her. That's to please Mary and mother, and then Joe's wife. And a good evening to you, Mr. Shane. If Joe hadn't called you back, I would have done it myself. You never find a decent meal up the valley. She was proud of her cooking, was mother. That was one thing she learned back home, she would often say, that was of some use out in this raw land. As long as she could still prepare a proper dinner, she would tell father when things were not going right. She knew she was still civilized and there was hope of getting ahead. Then she would tighten her lips and whisk together her special, most delicious biscuits, and father would watch her bustling about and eat them to the last little crumb and stand up and wipe his eyes and stretch his big frame and stomp out to his always unfinished work, like daring anything to stop him now. He's got these he's all fed awesomely on biscuits that Marion had made for him. We sat down to supper, and a good one. Mother's eyes sparkled as our visitor kept pace with father and me. Then we all leaned back, and while I listened, the talk ran on almost like old friends around a familiar table. But I could sense that it was following a pattern. Father was trying, with mother helping and both of them avoiding direct questions, to get hold of facts about this Shane. And he was dodging at every turn. He was aware of their purpose and not in the least annoyed by it. He was mild and courteous and spoke readily enough, but always he put them off with words that gave no real information. He must have been riding many days, for he was full of news from towns along his back trails as far as Cheyenne and even Dodge City, and others beyond I had never heard of before. But he had no news about himself. His past was fenced as tightly as our pasture. All they could learn was that he was riding through, taking each day as it came, with nothing particular in mind except maybe seeing a part of the country he had not been in before. Afterwards, mother washed the dishes and I dried, and the 2 men sat on the porch, their voices carrying through the open door. Our visitor was guiding the conversation now, and in no time at all, he had father talking about his own plans. That was no trick. Father was ever one to argue his ideas whenever he could find a listener. This time he was going strong. Yes, Shane, the boys I used to ride with don't see it yet. They will someday. The open range can't last forever. The fence lines are closing in. Running cattle and big lots is good business only for the top ranchers, and it's really a poor business at that. Poor in terms of the resources going into it. Too much space for too little results. It's certain to be crowded out. Well now, said Shane, that's mighty interesting. I've been hearing the same quite a lot lately, and from men with pretty clear heads. Maybe there's something to it. By Godfrey, there's plenty to it. Listen to me, Shane. The thing to do is pick your spot, get your land, your own land, put in enough crops to carry you and make your money play with a small herd, not all horns and bone, but bred for meat and fenced in and fed right. I haven't been at it long, but already I've raised stock that averages 300 pounds more than that long-legged stuff Fletcher runs out on the other side of the river. And it's better beef, and that's only a beginning. Sure, his outfit sprawls over most of this valley and it looks big, but he's got range rights on a lot more acres than he has cows, and he won't even have those acres as more homesteaders move in. His way is wasteful. Too much land for what he gets out of it. He can't see that. He thinks we small fellows are nothing but nuisances. You are, said Shane mildly. From his point of view, you are. Yeah, I guess you're right. I'll have to admit that. Those of us here now would make it tough for him if he wanted to use the range behind us on this side of the river as he used to. Altogether, we cut some pretty good slices out of it. Worse still, we block off part of the river, shut the range off from the water. He's been grumbling about that off and on ever since we've been here. He's worried that more of us will keep coming in and settle on the other side too. And then he will be in for a fix. I'll just quickly summarize this here. You've got one guy that has a bunch of land, like I was talking about a few acres, like a few football fields. We're talking like hundreds of those football fields, if not more. And he doesn't have many cow on them. for meat and selling purposes. So he's kind of wasting the land, according to Joe. Now Joe is saying, look at the cows I got raised on my land, and they're much bigger than those ones, and so forth. And Shane's getting at that, hey, this guy's not going to be happy because you're moving in on his land, and then maybe there's more homesteaders coming in. They're going to move in on his land. So this guy Fletcher that has all that land, maybe he's going to get pretty angry at you and other people. So that's basically the situation. The dishes were done, and I was edging to the door. Mother nailed me as she usually did and shunted me off to bed. After she had left me in my little back room and went to join the men on the porch, I tried to catch more of the words. The voices were too low. Then I must have dozed, for with a start I realized that Father and Mother were again in the kitchen. By now, I gathered, our visitor was out in the barn in the bunk Father had built there for the hired man who had been with us for a few weeks in the spring. Wasn't it peculiar? I heard Mother say. How he wouldn't talk about himself? Peculiar, said Father. Well, yes, in a way. Everything about him is peculiar. Mother sounded as if she was stirred up and interested. I never saw a man quite like him before. You wouldn't have. Not where you come from. He's a special brand we sometimes get out here in the grass country. I've come across a few. A bad one's poison. A good one, straight grain, clear through. So he's basically saying, if you're a bad person, this guy is bad news. If you're a good person, he's going to be good for your life. How can you be so sure about him? Why, he wouldn't even tell where he was raised. Born back east a ways would be my guess, and pretty far south. Tennessee maybe, but he's been around plenty. I like him. Mother's voice was serious. He's so nice and polite and sort of gentle. Not like most men I've met out here. But there's something about him. Something underneath the gentleness. Something. Her voice trailed away. Mysterious? Suggested Father. Yeah, yes, of course, mysterious. But more than that. Dangerous. He's dangerous, all right, Father said in an amusing way. Then he chuckled. But not to us, my dear. And then he said what seemed to me a curious thing. In fact, I don't think you ever had a safer man in your house. And that's the end of chapter 1. So maybe just talking about that line there, it got me a little bit teary because I have a lot of insight about this book already that maybe you guys don't out there. But what do you think Joe means when he's saying, I don't think you ever had a safer man in your house? She's saying dangerous, and Joe's saying you've never had a safer man here. So I'm curious, what do you think's going on there? Now, something I used to do with the younger kids, but I think it's kind of cool, and let's try it out, see how it goes. But I used to do faces. So at the end of a chapter, at the end of a reading, what we would do is make a face for some particular scene in there in the book. And I'm going to give my face for a scene, and then you could do yours. Maybe if you got a mirror or something, or take a photo and send it or something like that. No, don't do that. It's kind of weird. Just do it in the mirror, okay? I'm going to do mine. You do yours in the mirror. So let's do this. Let's do Bob kind of like looking up to Shane like he's this amazing man. Like, well, wow, who is this guy? Okay, so this is going to be my face with that. All right, so that's my face. You try it out. If you think that's too kiddie, then you know what? Go play games on TikTok. That's too kiddie. I'm sure that's more adult for you. If you're like me and you don't think that's too kiddie, you think it's kind of fun, do that face. Bob looking up to Shane. Anyways, that is it for today. I think the next chapter, unfortunately, there's no titles on the next chapter. This is some adult reading, right? There's no titles or something. But I think we're going to learn a little bit more about Shane. Good being with you, and we'll talk next Sunday. Adios.